One weakness is tempo swings, or cards that just sort of flip the board on them. It's very difficult to recover from things like that. And I think, if anything, his sort of Ramp Dragon list and Conjuring Force rune are going to have the tools for it, so it really just depends on if that works out.
We'll see if that's how it ends up playing. So here we go, kicking off, and it looks like we're going to start out with Haven versus Rune. So let's see if Exo is right. Take it away, guys.
Right, so this is the only match I feel like that could be kind of wild cardy, right? Because Conjuring Force does, I believe, have a slight advantage over Haven, but again, if Haven gets the right aggressive draw, I mean, that's why players play it, right? I mean, it can really just force through damage against anyone, so.
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny that even though this is just one of the most out there archetypes of rune we've ever seen, it still does contain 3 kaleidoscopic glows. So depending on how OnionSheep kind of mulligans this, we can find one of those early. That could be just a huge hit in the tempo that Fatina can gain early on.
You know, I've played a lot of Tempo Haven in my day, and I can tell you what it feels like when Beast Call Arya is sitting on 1. You've already ramped up your game plan. You're like, I know what I'm going to do. And then it gets kaleidoscopic load. And then your head drops down into your seat. I don't know where it goes. It rolls off onto the ground. It doesn't feel good. But yeah, Kaleidoscopic Glow is the most important card in this matchup by far in the early game. And then after that, it's just who can assemble damage the fastest.
I think it's so important, in fact, that OnionSheep just full mulligan perhaps for it. At least that's the read I want to try to make there. Unfortunately, the hand he's pulled here is really awkward. Rather than going for it, I think his hand actually got a significant amount worse by going for that.
Yeah, and I actually really like the keep from Fatina. Obviously, you're keeping Minu versus Rune. It's just a solid card versus Rune. We've seen that in past, of course. But the double Pinion Prayer keep is something I kind of want to talk about. So when you're on the draw against Rune, if you expect your opponent to have Kaleidoscopic Glow on 2, then it gives you a chance to play both of them out again and still have a really nice tempo play to push right back against Kaleidoscopic Glow. So I really like the hand that Fatina has. And like you said, OnionSheep full mulled and did not get what I think he wanted to see. So...
Even here, probably what he's thinking about is not even just whether to dump an Angelic Snipe. I highly doubt he ever would, but rather he's looking at this hand and just contemplating, you know, how do I develop this? If I hit certain important cards, then where do I go from there? How important is it to spell boost this Fiery Embrace, things like that? But yeah, as you said, keeping this with Fatina actually has so many implications to it, not just playing around Kaleidoscopic Glow, but this curves out really well with almost anything he can draw. Since Tempo Haven does have a very smooth curve, if he happens to miss a 3-drop or something along those lines and just pulls another 2, then it lines out a really strong turn 3. It's a really cool keep.
Absolutely. OnionSheep going back to his old style of OnionSheep play, where he has to sit and think, use up all of his turn, and you know what? That's okay. This is the finals of the finals of the finals. This is the time to slow play, as much as you can. Think about all of your options.
Yeah, plenty of time to play the game. There's like no reason not to take the time to think about his moves. I mean, even here, it might not be completely obvious to him whether he wants to commit Insight or Magic Missile.
Right, because this is an aggressive deck that does have a lot of low defense followers, Magic Missile is kind of premium. Like, it can pick off the Pinion Prayer follower that comes out. It can pick off anything. You know, if there's an Evo with it, like a Magic Owl's drawn on an Evo turn, it can pick off just that last defense that it needs to. So it's a pretty important card. But, of course, you need to get the flow of cards going with runes. So I still think Magic Missile's the play here. Yeah, I can't really see anything around that.
Right. There's a lot of very important spell boosts I've noticed in this list. Between Daria and being a Conjuring Force list, it does run several Snowman generators, but also has a backup plan of Blade Mage and Enchanted Swords. So having an Insight later on to be able to spell boost a much larger hand like that could be like a full turn reduction on how fast you can get out the actual game plan of the deck.
Well, that's actually one of the interesting spots that runes in, right? So like when you're playing a spell boost deck, it might seem good to always just play your cards as you draw them, utilize your play points every single turn, things like that. But think about how many play points rather your spell boosting actually reduces. Like when you have a hand with Angelic Snipes and Insight, you can wait until you build up an entire hand of spell boost cards and just rapid fire these cheap spells off so that you can get a game going on the turn that you want it to. You don't necessarily just have to use your resources immediately.
Those are probably thoughts that OnionSheep is just generally very carefully thinking about. Especially if he pulls something like a Fate's Hand, and just having all those 1 costs to throw in would be phenomenal for him.
But because his hand is looking not very good at the moment, still nothing too good to do here. Conjure Golem, probably his best play. Will probably Insight before it as well, just because he needs stuff to do. And right now, a couple of Angelic Snipes and a Fiery Embrace and a Levi that's not going to be turned on for a couple turns. Not really where he wants to be.
Yeah, I think this is always a very rough position to be in. He is on the play, but especially in a matchup like this, when you are sort of more the control in the matchup, then if the opponent is on the draw but also manages to pick up a better curve for tempo early on, you can easily find yourself just completely drowning in damage, because you have a much later, or a turn later of an evolve coming off of them, and they have more resources the entire time. So I think if OnionSheep takes too long to really develop anything, at least something to hold the board down, then we might just see this game over really quickly.
So OnionSheep just got an interesting draw for his Insight here. He's got Kaleidoscopic Low to bounce Pinion Prayer. If he does that, he doesn't really have an answer to Mine You for a few turns. If he plays Conjure Golem and Fatina doesn't trade with it, doesn't Blacken Scripture it, which doesn't look likely from the state of the hand, then he might have a way to deal with that Mine You. But this is like a tricky situation for OnionSheep, because he has to deal with that Mine You. But it looks like he's going to go with the plan of just bouncing the Pinion Prayer. Seems like a fine plan to me.
At that point, this both mitigates damage, and possibly he just wants the draw, just get that cycle in there. Though, as you said, it might be very difficult to deal with this Mine You, especially if it gets all the way to Fatina being able to evolve it, just because that's going to eat up the body of Levi post-evolve. So not having anything on board, and just no real way to this time to actually forestall the countdown amulets on Fatina's side. It's looking really rough, if you ask me.
Yes, it is. And even interesting tech choices. So Concentration's not a card that you normally see in this type of deck. Obviously, OnionSheep just favors more card draw. When you're playing against an aggro deck like this, though, paying 3 to just draw 2 cards on a turn can set you really far behind. This is a turn where he could do it, just because all those amulets are not going to be ticking down all the way on the beginning of Fatina's turn. So this might be his opportunity to do it, but he really needs to find some anti-aggro measures.
Then he goes for it. I agree. I think the call to make there is just, this is really the last turn he's ever going to get in the game to have a slow turn. He's going to have to do a lot more than that on the following turn, just because that is his last turn before the burst comes in. Both the second Evo after Fatina's next turn, as well as the coalescence of both Pinion Prayers.
Right, and it looks like he got really optimal draws there. He got 2 cards that he can finally spell boost. And saving Insights, this is what I'm talking about. Like, say he didn't play even Insight last turn, things like that. He could rapid fire these Insights off to make this Summon Snow bigger, faster, make this Fate's Hand smaller, all of those things. You just get so much more value out of the cost reduction that Insight grants you in a spell boost deck the longer you wait on it.
And what looks pretty nice for him is that the Fiery Embrace has been reduced down to 3 now. So with 5 play points coming up, he has a very clean way to just kind of dump out cards from his hand anytime soon into, as I mentioned before the game started, some kind of tempo swing where not only is it really useful to have things like Insight and Angelic Snipe for easy spell boosts, but once you start to reduce cards like Fate's Hand and Fire Embrace to 0-ish in that range, it just becomes really easy to fire everything off at the same time.
And it looks like Fatina has a really aggressive line. He can play this turn pre-Evo to get the damage in, probably going to be playing Hound. Looks like he favors card draw here over popping the Pinion Prayers. Interesting.
Well, that's very interesting to me too, actually. I guess what he's looking for is, I guess, more of a finisher, or more guarantees of some cards that might be able to convert more damage later on, rather than just try to use it for burst immediately, which I mostly agree with. I think one of the main weaknesses of Tempo Haven sometimes is no matter how far ahead you get early on, there's no super massive burst finisher other than just sometimes tech copies of a Taurus, which isn't, in my opinion, completely ideal.
Right. But I do think that OnionSheep's hand is developing quite nicely here. He's got the Levi play. He can clear up the entire board. He'll have to use every piece of Levi to do it, though, alongside of a Magic Missile and a Crimson Sorcery to basically clean it up. But that will do a lot of spell boosting. Those Summon Snows will be able to be played to the board. He still has backup Angelic Snipes for the Pinion Prayers that are going to be popping. And then he has a Daria to actually really push if he needs it.
So here, right, the Levi is probably the best way to go for here. I'm sorry if I sound a little bit distracted. My kitten behind my curtain has been like trying to like climb onto my shoulder and watch the game the entire time. But
this is the finals, Mofu.
Yeah.
This is the finals, okay? Kitty's probably excited.
Yeah, been sleeping through everything else up to this point. Now notices there isn't a control mirror on the screen or anything like that. But yeah, really good swing for OnionSheep. I think it really just comes down to whether Fatina can find the damage within, I think, a range of the next 3 turns, because I feel like OnionSheep's just completely ready to go off.
Yes.
Or at least up
Now,
to it within the next turns.
You see Fatina doing the March Hare's tea time dance. I think a lot of Haven players around the world will understand this dance. When you have Garuda in hand, you don't have March Hare's tea time, but then you draw it on turn 5. And then you just get a little bit more jump to your step, you know what I mean? You're feeling good.
That's the interpretive motion behind him right now, and he has a lot of time for it as well. He knows OnionSheep is just sort of taking his time with these turns, and when you're playing Tempo Haven versus it, you don't really have to spend too much time thinking about it. Just a lot of these plays are very straightforward. You're not against a deck that requires you to make a lot of different arcs and trades or anything. You just want to find that damage. So, to be honest, that March Hare's tea time could just have single-handedly finished it right there, because he has a very clean Garuda into it. And follow-up Garuda after that means OnionSheep's on a 2-turn clock and still has a board to clear.
Now, in saying that, if OnionSheep does clear this board, which I believe he will do, he's got the Fire Embrace and the 2 Angelic Snipes to do so. Along with developing the Summon Snow, he could actually set up a lethal board with that Conjuring Force the following turn, but getting rid of those Angelic Snipes really hurts that plan, right? So he's got to do it in the right order. And then he has a Daria to finish off with Conjuring Force next turn and maybe draw into some Blade Mages or something like that to really push for more damage. But he is in a tough spot regardless. This is not going to be easy for him.
Right. The very best, it looks like he's going as far as he can to get a board swing here. Fiery Embrace, thankfully. I had like the very top of the screen right above the rim of my glass, and I was like, please tell me that's at 0.
Yeah.
This is his only
Yeah,
chance
please.
remaining.
But with this play being made, Garuda means 6 damage, not 7. And this is before 7 play points, so Pinion Prayer can't come down as well. Dance of Death might even be used, but doubtful. I think it's just Garuda, March Hare's tea time, clean up as much of the board as possible, and hope I don't die to Conjuring Force on a crackback.
It didn't even occur to me that the pull of the Conjuring Force there would have actually made such a huge swing and advantage for OnionSheep, because this is a really dangerous board, and it could be just so tempting to drop OnionSheep to 1 here, but wise, Fatina takes no risks here. This is the very best he can to clear.
He knows. But this is a pretty brutal hand that OnionSheep got, and another Fate's hand to go along with it. Ooh. Ooh.
I don't think that's it yet. Conjuring Force into double snipe Fate's hand is an addition of 3, so that's 12 damage plus 2. No way to get an additional spell cast, I don't think, off the top of any kind.
No, doesn't look like it. And this is the last turn OnionSheep has alive, because even if this board is dealt with, we see Garuda and Pinion Prayer in hand for 5 damage.
It didn't occur to me
though.
that... Yeah, it didn't occur to me that Daria was active off of those spell boosts. So, there are some things. I think there were no Fate's hands left for him, though, so...
Ouch. So close. Only 5 damage away from lethal. Fatina, again, getting back to his happy dance. I like it. We're in good spirits today.
Yeah, it was a really close game. I think there were a lot of pulls for OnionSheep that he could have hoped for. Unfortunately, I think he already burned through 2 of his Fate's hand. He had 1 more, and with 0 left, yeah, I think that was about it. There's no other spell boosts that would have gotten him out of that spot.
Yeah, the funny thing about this game, too, is that Fatina was ahead the entire time. Had he not drawn that March Hare's tea time, I think he did have an opportunity to lose this game, is how close this game really was, even after the amazing start that Fatina had. So this goes a long way to say that Conjuring Force can really get out of any situation, but not this one.
It definitely highlights the danger of how much a tempo swing from Rune can just completely change the face of the game. I mean, that was somewhat, or at least a very highly threatened lethal scenario that kind of got him out of all the nonstop damage that Fatina had been playing for. So if we didn't see it that game, we might see him find some success with it. Perhaps next time. He's going to have to beat Agroforest now, I believe.
Yep, Agroforce is definitely a deck that can take on Rune. You know, we've got Lizas. We know how effective they are, just like mine use, except they do it for your entire board. So I believe the amount of Lizas will determine if it can beat Conjuring Force, because I think Conjuring Force is very well set up to actually beat Forest in the fact that it has Angelic Snipes, Magic Missiles, it has Summon Snowman to fill up the board, things like that. So it has ways to be defensive against Forest, but it has to get its right tools, as always.
Mm-hmm. Whereas Forest, I find, is a little bit more strapped to find ways to clear the bodies that it needs to. It has Maze and Airbound Barrages, which, if Fatina can kind of find those in his sort of top 10-ish range, I think it would be really nice against the ideal starter for OnionSheep. But we could easily find ourselves in a situation where Fatina either has to slow down a lot to start trading, or just become overwhelmed by the amount of times we'll have to be clearing snowmen.
That's true. It's absolutely true. And it's funny, like today, I want to talk about OnionSheep. So OnionSheep has morphed into like an incredibly different player over the season. He went from like hard control grinder decks, grinder meaning, of course, that they just try to grind their opponent into dust over time and then just win with whatever cards they have left over, into aggro we've seen him shift into. Now we're seeing him play more like combo control types of things. So it really feels like either A, he really understands what he wants to be playing against, and building decks for that, or he's really unsettled with himself on what he actually wants to bring to these tournaments. So I'm not really sure which part of the mindset he falls on, but it's interesting to think about because he's technically always been a player that brought those slower versions of decks, and we haven't seen that much from him this season.
Yeah, now that you describe it like that, if I could compare OnionSheep to someone, I think is actually very similar to Kionis in that both of them have brought all kinds of archetypes, different stuff every week at some points for both of them. And both of them are very thoughtful players who kind of like to take their time. We've seen Kionis develop over it, but OnionSheep as well now actually proceeding back towards trying to take as much time as he can to figure out his best lines of play. But a lot of variety, yet I don't remember OnionSheep ever really being in a phase where he was making many mistakes or sort of overlooking some things with all of the lists, despite how much he's changed his playstyle. I feel like he's just sort of a jack of all trades. I think he understands very well all the decks he brings. No doubt gets a lot of practice on all of them. So I guess what it just really comes down to is he making the right choices for what he wants against each opponent. Right now, I'm not sure if it's working out against this exact match versus Fatina, but that is yet to be seen.
So Fatina, is he a part of a band? Is he you know, like lead vocals? You know what I mean? I see him getting into a rhythm right now. And this is not a side of Fatina that we normally see. Normally he's cool, calm, collected, not very emotive, but not today. Today he's in his sweet spot. I like this. I like this new side of Fatina.
It's a good question. I mean, the background kind of makes me think of an album cover, if I'm honest. He's like advertising at the moment.
Right. Buy my album, Fatina, EU champion. Let's go.
I think if anything, he's just looking for some way to pass the time, as he knows that OnionSheep's just going to sort of take as much time as he can every turn. So it's just, you know,
maybe that's part of the strategy.
Yeah, stretch out those vocal cords.
He's like, you know what, OnionSheep's going to give me approximately 3 to 5 minutes every single turn, so time to practice my jams.
It's a full rehearsal along the side of backup dancer fantasy. Try to get him in here.
Now, this is actually another deck where Kaleidoscopic Glow is really good against in the early game to kind of mitigate value out of Water Fairy, things like that. And again, OnionSheep not really getting the early removal tools he wants, but definitely has a clear line of play in his hand. He's got his Summon Snows into Conjuring Force with a Fate's Hand. Now with the Daria being drawn, he's going to have to find some cheaper spells, though. I don't believe he's spell boosting enough, or as much as he'd like to, into these early turns.
Yeah, it feels like of all rune lists I've seen, this list always tends to draw the most awkward or clunky opening hands sometimes, just because whereas other rune lists can sort of just have their win condition in hand like D-Shift, or have a very strong balance of two mechanics like Earthright or the likes, it tends to not be too difficult to find a pretty easy opener. Whereas this list has a lot of different ways it can go. It has a lot of different win conditions that it can work on, or different ways to win every game. And so especially when it doesn't find its early game disruption like Kaleidoscopic Glow or Magic Missile or any sort of way to remove threats from the board, then it's sort of the development of its game plan can be so much more awkward. It might not be good enough just to go Insight into summon Ice Form. It's very slow, but he does have, as you said, all the tools he needs to kind of have a more promising mid-game at the very least, which is where I'm starting to understand this deck really, is it has a very exploitable early game in exchange for a very strong tempo swingy mid-game, I think.
Right. It can literally do things that no other deck can, right? Like on turn 5, 6, and 7, it can put together 20 damage plus combos. So it can do crazy things, even through wards and all that kind of stuff. One play I actually want to highlight here is Fatina's use of Wood of Brambles here. So in my mind against Rune, Elf Girl Liza is the play 100% of the time. It will present more damage over a few turns, and then I can save the Wood of Brambles for a turn after Summon Snow is played, so I get the most use out of it. I feel like Fatina actually took a backseat to aggro here with that play. He's kind of like, I just want to build up value. I don't really care about pushing as much damage early, which I think might hurt him. If he gives Rune enough time, that's exactly what we're talking about. This mid-game can actually just bowl him over. So I'm very interested to know the idea behind the Wood of Brambles play here.
There are times where I feel like this sort of line of play is just fine, because if you develop a larger board for the turn where you drop Liza, then that can be just absolutely like it for Rune, really. But not dropping it on 2 is like it is definitely the arc between a very safe versus a very high risk, high reward sort of play. And here, it's possible he doesn't even go for it. In fact, yeah, he's still going for the biggest board possible, and I think if he drops Liza anytime soon, then that could just end the game on the spot.
The one advantage he did give away in doing this, though, is this follow-up Summon Snow. The Wood of Brambles will be gone, and all of these fairies will be susceptible, and there's no Elf Song in hand to kind of push them out of range of just dying to board here. So this is kind of the talk, or this is kind of the tempo of the game I was talking about. With Wood of Brambles being played earlier, it means that these Summon Snows can actually come back and take over the board, which I really like from OnionSheep here. I don't think there's any other play he can make.
If he's thinking about anything here, I think it's he's questioning himself, do I want to Insight before I summon Ice Form? Considering there are 4 spell boost targets here, what else does he really need to hit with it? Alongside that other question of, well, maybe he wants to hold it until after Conjuring Force because he has a relatively empty hand for an actual thing there, but it's a lot to consider. It actually doesn't come to any surprise, as any surprise to me that OnionSheep is taking so much time with it. But, right, as you say, I think Ice Form is a fantastic play here. It plays around Liza perfectly. I mean, Fatina probably wasn't expecting to deal with the second one, but I imagine...
Wait, Mofu. Summon Snow, okay? Not Ice Form. Ice Form also good, but we don't see it anymore. Ice Form is the big 5/5 with Ward that will die at the end of the opponent's turn. Summon Snow, the one that puts out the little snowman.
Thanks for that correction. I see this card so rarely that I just forgot. So the Ice Form was in my brain.
It's in a deck. It's in a deck, yeah. Summon Ice Form used to be an incredible card. An incredible card. Just stalling out aggressive boards, things like that. But I think it might just be too slow and too easy to get around nowadays for people to even want to consider it. I did try it in Conjuring Force for a little while, but even back then it ultimately fell because it kind of just doesn't do much, right? It says, I'm going to pass my turn. I'm going to spell boost once. What do you got? All right. Nothing cool. We'll just continue on.
It seems like it'd be so cool as a card that can extend games, and just that alone is such a useful promise. But there are a lot of games where just your opponent can just shrug it off because you didn't spend much time doing anything with it. But yep, it's just when it hit me and I was like staring at it, I was like, okay, so I can see the word summon on there. And I'm like, it's not something that obvious as Summon Snowman, right? Because Shadowverse likes to put really, really fancy names on its cards half the time. So I was like, it's Ice Form. That's it. It's in my head.
Absolutely fine. It's not a big mistake. You know what I'm saying? Just want to make sure that you know what's going on. So in this play, Liza protects an entire board. Great board setup against Rune. However, Fatina clearing off board in favor of just not dying to Conjuring Force plays has not really dealt that much damage to OnionSheep yet. So we'll see if OnionSheep has been given enough time to actually execute his game plan. And Daria is really scary. I mean, Daria can do a lot of things, right? So
yeah, it looks to me as though Daria is an option immediately, but it throws away a lot of very premium tools. But if he doesn't go for it, his next best play is just tossing away a Blade Mage. Well, This is where your observation of how Fatina's been playing the game so far really comes into application, I think, where he hasn't really been playing for damage the whole game. So I feel like OnionSheep's not terribly pressured to have to go for very much. He has a very high life total still. He's not under threat of just taking damage from board into Fairy Driver. But
Right.
I think that Darius still is the faster and safer of the plays, and he still chooses to go for it.
And I really like this target. Of course, you never want to see Liza bounced and replayed against you as runes, so he's favoring clearing off that option instead of the extra damage, which I really like. The other cool thing that it does is it prevents cards like we see in hand right now from being able to evo into it appropriately. Like Fairy Driver would have to actually just sacrifice herself in order to do this. But I think the Daria is just going to be forgotten about. This is just full damage turn.
Right. And this is the upside to the way that Fatina has been playing, is he's had such a commanding grip of the board that the first time he hits one of his main sort of enablers for a lot of damage like Elf Song, he's already set up for it because he's already got so much developed by the first time that OnionSheep can really even deal with Liza.
Yeah. And now we actually see it really kick in for OnionSheep. Playing these cards like Concentration, especially drawing them off of Daria, cannot feel good. There's nothing about that feels good.
Well, I think there was some confidence behind him bringing these lists here, so unfortunate. I think Fatina just made the right call in general. We're seeing his aggro lineups just completely run over OnionSheep's Conjuring Force rune, which is unfortunate considering how much I like watching the deck, but it's also something that we did anticipate.
That's absolutely correct. And he's got an Angelic Snipe, he's got an Evo, so he can clear out all but 2 damage here. That can be Evo'd for 4, and Fairy Driver next turn can play 2 Fairies for another 4. That's game. That's game, ladies and gentlemen. But OnionSheep, of course, going to play to as many outs as he possibly can, which is clearing off as much of the board. But as we know, Fatina's already got it under wraps. This is much like last game, where Tempo Haven, even after the board is being cleared, Fatina has this damage push out of hand that can still win the game. Last time it was Pinion Prayer and Garuda. This time, Fairy Driver.
Right. Something worth noting, at least to me, about the speed of the decks as well, is OnionSheep has been on the play both times, meaning he's had a pretty decent extension of how much he can get off, and we're seeing, his deck is almost getting there, it really is. It's pushing onto the board really well, cycling through most of itself. I mean, he's 26 cards in here, but just there's no way to mitigate damage in the list, so hasn't been able to find any decent tempo swings with Prime Wind. That's just kind of how it falls apart against Fatina.
Right, and Fatina will take this first one and solidify himself into the finals. And that means that OnionSheep's going to have to do battle with Akamara Red to see who's going to face Fatina in the finals. And so far, Mofu, I've got to say, my predictions are coming true. Fatina has not stopped dancing this entire time.
You know, at some point, I feel like that's some kind of deception by Fatina. It's like casting some kind of illusion over the board state there. But Fatina does take that win 2-0, and I think you identified it correctly. And one of